Well, our movie this week is called Project Moonbase, and it features a group of astronauts almost as inept as you are, Joel.
And a plot as weak as herbal tea.
Yes, but first, how about a double dip of our old friend Commando Cody and the radar men from the moon?
This time, we watched Season 1, Episode 9, Project Moonbase.
In which an ambitious, competent woman ends up married to a mediocre man on the moon.
But we've also got 2 more episodes of Radar Men from the Moon, so yay.
Seriously, two? They hate us.
They do. But first, we've got a little bit of follow-up from our lovely listeners who presumably don't hate us, or at least not too much, but do hate inaccuracies, which we also hate.
It's true. We like to learn things, and so our listeners are awesome at helping us learn things that we did not know before or misspoke about, as I often do.
As you did last time, which I heard when you did it, but I'll get to that in a moment. Devoted listener Lars pointed out in our Patreon-only Discord that Charlotte did a little bit of a whoopsie when talking about Oscar Wilde last episode when you referred to him as an English author.
Yeah, my bad. I guess?
Well, all right. So here's the thing. He, of course, was born in Ireland. He was an Irish author, and I'm sure our Irish nationalists would love to claim the brilliant man for themselves. But when I heard you say that, I thought to myself, well, wait a minute. Like, he moved to London when he was pretty young, and he was very much all about writing about London. And, like, did he think of himself as Irish or English or what?
Oh, is this why you didn't correct me at the time? Because you were like, I need to fact check this later.
Yeah, that, and also I was completely boggled by the fact that he showed up in this Western.
Okay, true. I think they were putting him in there like somebody might drop Mark Twain in something, you know, like, oh, let's just put some clever man in here.
Yeah. Well, and of course, and Oscar Wilde did travel around the U.S. for a bit. So, you know, that actually happened. He may not have hired the guy from Kev Gunn Will Travel, but...
He might not have hired Paladin? What? He might not have had hired guns escorting him through California's Wild West?
I mean, he might have, though. I don't know. I haven't read his full biography. But I did try to read something about what he thought of himself in terms of national identity. And the answer is, it's complicated. So, you know.
And that's okay. People can have complicated ideas about their own place of origin or what they most particularly think of themselves as. That's okay.
But here's another thing. You weren't the only one who made a bit of a whoopsie.
Oh.
Because several people wrote in to tell me something that I, in fact, knew and forgot to bring up. But I'll read from Wildstar Studios' comment to us. The original version of the screenplay for Ibira Horror of the Deep was intended to be King Kong versus Ibira.
What?
Yeah.
But King Kong can't swim in the ocean, so how would he have gotten off of the island afterwards? I totally get why they switched to Godzilla.
Well, all right, I'll read on. Toho waited too long to get their new King Kong movie into production and lost the rights to make any more King Kong movies. So they just swapped him out for Godzilla.
Sure.
Now, I knew about the King Kong thing, but here's the part that I should have thought of and I feel really foolish for not getting. Ahem. Going back to Wildstar. This is not only why there is a scene in which Godzilla picks up an island girl, but also why lightning is used to wake up the sleeping kaiju.
Oh.
The Toho version of King Kong was given electrical powers in King Kong versus Godzilla so that he would have something to balance out Godzilla's atomic breath.
Oh.
So we talked about the King Kong moment, and everybody was like, yeah, of course there's a King Kong moment in the film. It was supposed to be a King Kong film.
Oh, I had no idea. What an interesting thing to think of how different that movie would have been. But Mothra and King Kong don't have like a symbiotic relationship like Godzilla does with Mothra in some of the later kaiju films. So I'm wondering, like, does Mothra have a relationship with King Kong, or was Mothra brought in at the same time Godzilla was? Maybe I'm asking too much.
I'm loving that you're volunteering to watch all the Toho King Kong and Godzilla movies. I love this for me because then I don't have to, and I can just get to hear it from you. And that's great.
Chris, you told me there were no more Godzilla movies on MST3K. So these are just questions I put out into the universe at this point in time because our time with Godzilla has closed.
Hey, I finally watched The Fog, okay? So, like,
Okay, it's never closed.
even if we don't come back to it on pod, it's always good to follow up on the intriguing things that you learn on this podcast.
That is very true. It is very true. And, you know, maybe the Mothra having a connection with Godzilla is something that is a later addition, because it certainly was in like the 2016 ones that I watched a couple of years ago. Anyway,
We got to get on to Project Moonbase.
we totally do, I guess. Yes, we do. This time we watch Season 1, Episode 9, Project Moonbase.
But first, some shorts. 2 more episodes of Radar Men from the Moon. Are you ready for the exciting adventures of Commando Cody in his fight against Retic, the ruler of the Moon People? Well, you're getting some anyways. In Chapter 7, Camouflage Destruction, Commando Cody chases after some of Retic's henchmen on Earth. They're in a truck, transporting a powerful ray gun. Commando Cody has a rocket-powered jetpack backpack, but this time he's in a small plane, trailing after the henchmen. The henchmen shoot the plane with the ray gun, and it explodes. And so, Chapter 8, The Enemy Planet, shows Commando Cody's funeral. No, just kidding. Turns out he jumped out just in time, but the director forgot to show us. Silly director. Commando Cody goes back to the moon and tries to steal some of their lunarium, which is an element even more powerful than uranium. That's what's powering the ray guns, I guess. Anyway, this one ends with a lunar car chase. Cody's lunar car gets hit by a ray gun, of course, and his partner, well, surely he's gonna die this time, right? Tune into Chapter 9, Battle in the Stratosphere, to find out. But for now, that's the end.
And now for our feature presentation. The enemies of freedom have vowed to destroy the space station that's been established in orbit around the Earth. They have a large network of operatives in the world to help out, and it seems a mission is headed to the space station soon that could use some sabotaging. The bad guys have chosen to swap out a perfect match to the photographer who will be headed into space, a Dr. Werner. The Dr. Werner lookalike gets into the very official car and heads to the launching center. At the launch center, some very official NASA-type folk are discussing the upcoming trip, including who will be pilot. It seems an up-and-coming Colonel Bright Eyes will be heading the mission. But what's this? Bright Eyes is a woman? What? And she comes in with orders from the president that these menfolk must do an interview with Polly Prattles, a very pushy reporter, also female. They patronize her and mansplain space travel and Earth orbits and other science stuff that the regular public couldn't possibly understand. But they do describe the mission at hand, to head to the space station, switch ships, then set a course around the moon to photograph the other side and survey it for possible future moon bases. The no-good-sees hope to use the rocket ship to crash into the space station and destroy it instead. Colonel Bright Eyes falls into the trusting trap and gives lookalike Werner a lesson in flying the spacecraft, as if her many years of service and expertise were not very necessary after all. But her co-pilot, Major Bill Moore, doesn't trust the guy. After all, this Werner doesn't even root for the Brooklyn Dodgers, despite having lived there. It's like the guy doesn't even know what baseball is. He must be up to no good. Lookalike Werner hears Bill and Bright Eyes talking about his suspiciousness, so he comes up and fights with Bill. Bright Eyes starts the rockets going, which burns up so much fuel, but the acceleration effect allows Bill to beat Werner. With so little fuel left, they're forced to land on the moon, but their position does not allow them to communicate with anyone to get help. Bill and lookalike Werner head out to set up a relay station for their communication signals. They succeed, but lookalike Werner falls down a hill and dies. Bill makes it back okay, but just barely, given the limited oxygen in his tanks. Bright Eyes and Bill finally get in contact with Earth and the space station and let them know they've landed on the moon. Oh man, the officials on Earth have to figure out how to handle this. It wasn't the intended mission. They decide to make this little ship Moon Base 1, with Bright Eyes and Bill staying there for a long time. In a private message to Bill, his commander lets him know all of Earth expects him to marry Bright Eyes. I mean, it would just look better, you know? A single woman and a single man alone for weeks, even months, in a tin can on the moon. What will people think? Bill's too embarrassed at first, thinking Bright Eyes is too good for him. But eventually they get married and the president congratulates them. What's this? The president is female? We can only dream. The end.
Meanwhile, on the satellite of love, we begin with Joel cleaning up the bots to get ready for the experiment. Now, sometimes in the early days, we'd get to see Joel and the bots all wearing, would you call them bathrobes or dressing gowns? Either way, it always looks so cozy. But then the Mads call, and it's time for the invention exchange. Crow shoots some water at Joel from a turkey baster, and Joel juggles them between two ping-pong paddles. The Mads have made an Etch-a-Sketch out of an ant farm, but you can still shake it to erase it, which seems kind of yikes. Anyway, after the shorts, Tom Servo is dressed up like Commando Cody, and Joel is carrying him around so he can fly. Crow is dressed up like a moon man, but he wants to be Commando Cody, and they fight about it too. They're about to really get to fisticuffs, but it's stopped by commercial sign. The futuristic fashion from the movie includes some incredibly short ties, and this inspires Joel and the bots to model other kinds of fun ties from the future. Really long curly ties, anti-gravity ties, ties that dab your mouth if you dribble your soup, and a tie that will automatically lengthen if the fashion for ties changes. So, that's fun. But now, it's Spackum, the slimy gloop that will solve all your household problems. Joel plays with a big handful of color-changing slime, while Tom and Crow announce all the wonderful uses for Spackum, from fixing your broken china, to removing those plantar warts, to slicing thin as a substitute for roast beef. Why, there's nothing Spackum can't do. Order now. At the end of the movie, Tom and Crow are walking on the ceiling, just like on the space station in the movie. They read some letters, and the Mads make some threats, and I guess we can call that a day. What do you think, sirs?
Oh, Chris, I can't watch another Commando Cody. I mean, I know I have to.
There's only one more episode to watch.
But seriously, 2 in 1 episode? Oh my gosh, I was watching this and I was just like, gosh, I hope the movie and the riffing of the movie is better than this. Because I feel like even Joel and the bots are a little tired of the things that they have to say to Commando Cody. Because it's the same stuff all the time. And fortunately, I think Project Moonbase was a much better half of the episode.
I mean, it would almost have to be. Yeah,
right?
They committed to a bit, let's say, when they decided to do this many episodes of Radar Men from the Moon. And it didn't pay off. And now, because we've committed to this bit that we're doing, we're stuck with the consequences. Yay! Wow,
let's amplify everyone's bit commitment.
So that's the shorts, but did you enjoy the movie?
I did, actually. Well, okay. I enjoyed the riffing of the movie. I felt like Joel and the bots did a really good job of uplifting that movie for me. I think their work through the movie really saved the episode for me because Commando Cody is really rough for me. For some reason now, it's just not hitting the way I want it to. So yeah, I enjoyed that half of the movie. What'd you think of Project Moonbase?
I appreciate MST3K sometimes, specifically for making it easier for me to watch movies with little merit but a few really interesting details. And Project Moonbase has some interesting details. It makes a few interesting choices along the way.
Which choices did you like the most?
Well, we'll talk about this in a moment, I think. But it had some things to say about women. And wow, did it make some big swings and some interesting choices there. I mean, the plot description, the fact that like the end of movie twist is you guys got to get married.
Okay, yeah, that's a little like, come on, guys.
I think there's a special category on AO3 for fanfic with that trope of you two are stuck together now, and for national security reasons, we need you to get married.
Yeah, it doesn't even seem like it was national security reasons. It was PR.
No, of course. It was because people mustn't think about what these two people are doing up in the night. You look up at the night sky, you see the moon, and you know that two unmarried people are canoodling, are cohabitating together for weeks at a time.
Oh my goodness. The thing is, if I'm going to look up the moon and think that there's two people on there, the fact that they're married makes me think there's fornication way more than two unmarried people being up there.
No, they are literally honeymooning now.
I know. By design. It's like they sent them up there in order to get them married because, of course, they had to hate each other at the beginning of the movie. Like, oh, there's so much tension between us. He doesn't respect my ambition. And it's like, oh, you guys are going to get married at the end of the movie, aren't you? Yes. Yes, they are.
Or die. It could have been
Or
one of those movies where they die.
Yeah, that's possible. No. Yes, but the president is female. Come on. That's kind of cool. How many movies in the 50s would have allowed for a future with female presidents?
We will talk about that, I think, in a moment.
Okay.
But I also enjoyed this episode because it's a season 1 episode. They're still figuring out what they can do and what they shouldn't do. And so they do a few things where they kind of break the format a bit in fun ways. There's a notable section where there's a fight happening and Joel holds up sound effects in Shadowrama. So it goes like biff, bam, oof.
So it can be a Batman episode from the 60s.
Exactly. That's a lot of fun.
That was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that a lot.
There's the whole bit at the end where they have Tom and Crow upside down on the ceiling. I guess that's perfectly fine and part of the rules, but it was still a fun gimmick.
Yeah.
To see them play with that. And importantly, there's a moment early on when there's a phone call that happens in the short, and Joel pretends to be the person on the phone as normal.
Oh, yes.
But then says, oh, I'm doing this and I'm worried about the thing that's going to happen. And then on the movie, the actor then says, they're worried about the thing that's about to happen. The details are boring. But the point is, it breaks the rules. Joel's not supposed to know what's going to happen next, but they put a few of those jokes in this episode to try it out.
I like it, quite frankly.
I like that they're exploring. I think I prefer the kayfabe of them not knowing what's supposed to be happening and pretending like they are responding live. I like that vibe.
Yeah, but then you tend to get more things like, oh, I just put in the laundry and I'm wondering if you're coming home soon. You know, like things that are a little bit more mundane as opposed to, I'm really worried about nuclear war. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I like that.
I could go either way. I like Joel being the people on the phone, just like I like him being the voices of the horses,
yes.
And I like him being the voices of the cats. Like I'm here for all that. I love that.
Another thing that I enjoyed about this movie is that it imagines a timeline where we get into space, we build an entire space station and have it full-time habited, and yet we still haven't gone to the moon yet. We haven't even flown around the moon.
I hadn't even thought about that, but you're right. Like that space station is really super advanced for never having gone any further.
But like, I get why they thought that, right? I get the idea because the moon is so much further.
Well, yeah.
And it feels like getting on and off the moon is probably harder than getting on and off a space station.
And isn't that how you would have done travel beforehand? You would have gone as far as you could, set up an outpost so that you could have a place with lots of supplies and stuff, because you didn't know whether you could make the whole journey with what you had on board. So if you have a way station somewhere, you can get there, get everything that you need, and then go from there. And also, who knows? Maybe what they can build in space is just so much more efficient than what they can build in the gravity of Earth. I don't know.
It's possible. I remember when I was younger, there was some people talking about building a station on the moon so that we'd have a launch pad to go to Mars with, which in terms of how far these things are apart from each other. It's kind of like walking to the end of a pier so that you can jump across the Atlantic Ocean.
Sure. I mean, scale is always difficult for us to understand sometimes, but I wanted to point out the whole treatment of Polly Prattles. Because it really bothered me when I was watching it. It was one of the low points in the riffs for me, was just all of the fat-phobic comments that they were making to Polly Prattles and how they were treating her. It was really bothersome. And it wasn't, I mean, the movie had it as well, but the movie was subtler than the riffs. And just, it was bothersome. And they're not always great with their riffing. And this was one of those examples where I'm just like, oh, come on, guys. Like, we don't need to do a send up of this lady for that.
No, it's really awful and tedious. And it's really unfun to see just how horny Josh is the whole time and how he's constantly making jokes about women and women's appearance and how sexy it would be if only there was a woman right now.
Yeah, well, and like, how many different ways can we make comments about the breasts of the main character? Let us count the ways. Oh, so many. I mean, although I do want to acknowledge the bras of the 40s and 50s with their like weird rocket shapes that like Madonna amplified inside of her tour in the 90s. Like, yeah, those were weird, man. Like, our idea of what a woman's body should look like has changed over time, and that is a very specific look from a very specific time. So I'll grant a riff about that, totally worth it. 3 or 4, you're pushing it.
Yeah. But, Josh was still a teenager and it was still 1989, I believe. So
yeah, so comments about women's bodies was not unusual. For comedy.
Not great, but not unusual. Exactly. And I like to harp on Josh for a bit, but like it feels like it did change once he left, that you didn't get these random outbursts of homina all the time.
Did they just have more women on staff at that point in time, or was it really just that one staffing change?
I don't know. Mike came in and Josh left, and so that might have made a slight change in terms of what kind of jokes were cut, let's say.
Oh, that's true.
And like, as far as I can tell, Josh Weinstein is great now. Like,
yes.
Like he's grown up quite a bit. This is nothing on him.
Of course. Yeah. And it was very appropriate for the time.
Sure. And it's hard to be in the public spotlight when you're 18.
Yeah.
So like,
appropriate's not the word I want to use. It was not unusual at the time for those kinds of comments to be made. So many of the popular movies in the 80s were telling us that ogling women's bodies and talking about them for what made them attractive and what made them unattractive was a perfectly fine thing to talk about in public loudly.
Well, then we should talk about Robert Heinlein. So what a lovely surprise when this movie started up, because I hadn't realized that the primary screenwriter and story writer for Project Moonbase was none other than Robert A. Heinlein.
And I have to say, when you were suggesting that we talk a little bit more about Robert Heinlein, I was like, I've never actually read anything about this guy or by this guy, and I don't know anything about his background. And when you were listing so many of the books that he's written, I was just like, okay, and I've heard of that one, and I've heard of that one. So this is, just a blank spot inside of my reading history, because sci-fi wasn't always the genre that was primary for me.
Right. Well, I grew up reading some of his books for sure. And in particular, there's a book of his called Stranger in a Strange Land.
Oh.
That I read multiple times when I was a teenager.
Oh, how interesting.
But I will say, when this movie started going up and when it started introducing its female characters, and they had a very particular combination of competence and very weird stereotyped imagery of what a woman is and should be, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh yeah, this is Heinlein. Oh yes, it is.
How interesting. So when we were introduced to Colonel Bright Eyes, first off, there's no gender pronouns used for Colonel Bright Eyes until she walks in the room. So I had no idea that Colonel Bright Eyes was going to be female until she came in the room.
Yep, it's intentionally surprising you.
Yeah, well, but I should have because of the way that the two men were talking about her and how the one was just like, oh, we just don't get along. But I thought it was going to be some like big macho thing. But the thing that I was going to ask you, when Colonel Bright Eyes is talking to her superior officer, she talks back to him, despite him being her superior officer inside of what is clearly a military outfit. She whines and she is just like, you can't make me. I think that's a bad idea. And it's just like this. I have been trained in many movies that this is just not how you talk to a superior officer when you are receiving orders. Is that kind of characterization common for Heinlein?
On two fronts, yes. First off, there's the woman angle. And so some of his female characters can just be like that sometimes.
Mhm.
And then also, he's really interested in characters who don't follow authority but go with their guts. Heinlein was a libertarian, and libertarian philosophy kind of bleeds through a lot of his characters that are kind of self-insert characters. And some of those characters sure do love to lecture. So, especially to women.
Wow.
What a surprise.
Sure. Yeah. Well, ladies be telling you what to do.
The other thing that is in that scene with the general and Bright Eyes yelling at each other is that the general threatens to spank her.
I cannot believe this. And it chastises her.
Well, I believe it because I've read Heinlein before.
Ugh.
And powerful men who have powerful women working for them often put them in their place in a joking way by threatening to spank them.
This is totally like straight from the movie McClintock with John Wayne, where he has to spank Maureen O'Hara and like the love interest of his daughter has to spank her. But it's also like a plot point in a Paladin episode that I just watched for our last episode because there was an altercation where a person who was in charge of a ranch was chastising one of his ranch hands in town, and the ranch hand like threatened him with a gunfight, and so the guy who was in charge grabbed him and put him over his knee and spanked him in front of the whole town. And like Paladin walked up and was just like, you can't spank him in front of everybody. You're creating a situation where you're making everybody look at him like he's a boy when he wants to be a man and prove himself your equal. And he'll never be able to do that when you keep treating him like a juvenile.
Right. Well, so I decided to reread Stranger in a Strange Land.
Ooh, what'd you think?
So I read it a bunch when I was a teen and quite liked it. And then at some point I tried to reread it when I was a little bit older in my early 20s and was like, actually, I don't think I want to read this again, and put it down.
What made you put it down when you were in your 20s? I've never read it. So was there something in particular in the book that made you put it down when you were in your 20s?
I think it was all the awfulness to women.
Fair enough.
I think there's a certain ugliness to some of the characters. As I'm rereading it this time, I'm seeing things in it that make it clear what was appealing to me. So Stranger in Strange Land is about the first human mission to Mars. All of the colonists die, but there is a child that was the first Earthling born on Mars who is raised by Martians and is rescued, so to speak, 25 years later and brought back to Earth. And so it's about how this guy, whose name is Valentine Michael Smith, how this quote-unquote alien who is raised up with Martian language and Martian ways of thinking and Martian philosophy, how he's going to fit in our world and all of the political machinations that are going on around him. It's him, and it's also this other guy, this guy from Earth named Jubal Harshaw, who is the Heinlein stand-in character, the Mary Sue, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
It is somebody who is very eccentric, very libertarian, lives on his own little ranch in the Poconos with 3 secretaries, a blonde, a redhead, and a brunette, who are all very competent, but are all very, subservient to him, but also if you want to leave, you can leave. If you want to do something, is what he says. But he's also clearly the person in charge and with all the money. And these hyper-competent women just sort of work under him and don't say anything about it, even though blah, 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 blah. It doesn't make any sense, right? But whatever.
Fine.
And Jubal Harshaw is also in his own way somebody who is like philosophically and culturally different from the rest of America, right?
How so?
Because he doesn't fall for all the bullshit, because he can see through everything, because he's hyper competent, because he knows a little bit about everything, because he can see through stuff, and he's a self-made person, and he just wants to live on his own, and he doesn't want to take any guff from the government, and all of these kinds of myths. And of course, he's always right, which, you can get away with if the author is writing in your favor and doesn't let you be wrong.
Sure, yes.
But he goes on all these magnificent speeches and makes these little deft political moves, and it's like, oh, what are you doing? And he gets to explain it at length to all the people around him, usually to the men.
Like Sherlock Holmes style? Like, how did you do it, Holmes? Well, I saw this speck of dirt from 100 miles away, and then I knew.
Yeah, kind of, but much more insufferable. So we've got that kind of philosophy on the one side.
More unsufferable than Sherlock Holmes, who I love, but still.
Don't make me read quotes from this.
No. Totally cool.
But then you've also got the weird philosophy of Smith, the alien, who comes from a society where they cannot be violent to each other. It's simply not understood.
Oh, how interesting.
And where they can have tremendous control over their bodies. They can go into deep stasis, and they can sort of leave their bodies psychically and telekinetically move to the world and twist things into the fourth dimension if they need to, if they're somehow wrong or dangerous or don't feel like they should be. And it's beautiful. He's got this very beautiful sense of connection to things. And both Smith and Harshaw are kind of really compelling iconoclastic characters. Mm-hmm. If you're in the mood for that sort of thing, which, surprise, surprise, when I was a teenager, I might have been.
Sure. Yeah. Why not? Having control over the world around you, very appealing to teenagers.
Exactly. So that part is nice. But man, I am not happy about how the women are treated as I'm reading it now. Oh boy.
Hardly surprising. Yeah.
But yeah, Harshaw likes to threaten to spank his secretaries when they say things to him, but he doesn't actually do it, as importantly. As far as I know, he never actually spanks them. And sometimes they do things to him. They throw him in the pool when he's getting a little bit too full of himself. So
wow.
I don't want to say that's all equal, but it's
no,
it's something.
Sure. Yes. I mean, he at least gives them enough of comfort and power in the situation to be able to not fight back. That's not the right term, but have some agency.
Right. They express their agency as a way of showing that everything they're doing is an expression of their agency, which doesn't seem like it could possibly be the case. But there you go.
God, at least there were women in that Heinlein novel, because when you said that Heinlein had written this and were listing some of the novels that he had written, I wanted to read Starship Troopers. And part of the reason I wanted to do that is because I've seen the movie, and the movie is such a hot mess, but a fun hot mess. You know what I mean? And I had no idea when I saw the movie, a long time ago now and recently, that it was based on a book. So I thought, I'm going to try and read Starship Troopers, because there are women in the movie, oh gosh. And I guess I just didn't know what I was getting myself into with Heinlein having these terrible female representations in his novel. But it turns out it's great for Starship Troopers because he just doesn't have any, really.
Oh.
I mean, it works out really well for everyone, I guess.
So I never read Starship Troopers. It was one of his earlier books. I think it was his last juvenile book before he started writing Stranger in a Strange Land. I think that's the timeline.
What a weird book to think of as one for young adults. But yeah.
It was very popular, I believe.
Yeah, it certainly seems from what I was reading in the foreword that it was a well-received book and a popular book. and Heinlein in general is, right? I think I was reading his Wikipedia article, and it was like he's one of the big 3 sci-fi authors with Asimov, It's just this guy's formative for what sci-fi would eventually become. So I thought, gosh, this is going to be interesting. For anybody who's seen the movie Starship Troopers but not read the book, there is a female character who starts out as the girlfriend of our main character, whose name is Carmen. She goes to the same school as Johnny Rico, who is our main character, and she wants to be a pilot. And throughout the course of the movie, like, they break up because she wants to go career as a pilot. She's part of like 2 different love triangles. There's all of this romantic, ridiculous tension. In the book, Carmen is there. She is a classmate of Johnny's, but she's no one's girlfriend. She dates whoever she wants to for as long as she wants to. No one can claim her. She does want to become a pilot. She enlists at the same time as Rico. There's a couple of other places where she kind of connects back with him, but it's mostly to give him updates on what's happening at home because Rico's parents have rejected him and are not contacting him until later in the book. And it seems like they might connect together after the book's end or something like that. But it's not like this intense, like, high school relationship where he wanted to marry her and then she dumped him and dated another guy, which is what happens in the movie.
Okay.
Heinlein does do a thing, though, where he's like, pilots are all women.
What?
Pilots are all women because women have better instincts. They have better reaction times.
They're 98 pounds.
He doesn't even bring up the cost of ladies in space, but he does put forth that they have better instincts. They have better agility with large spacecraft. They're better mathematically. It's so weird. And then he just drops it because the whole book is focusing on Johnny Rico and his path through mobile infantry and then into officer school and deciding to be career. And, the capture of a brain bug does happen inside of the book, but it doesn't have the weird sexual politics that you're talking about in Stranger in a Strange Land.
Well,
isn't that weird?
Well, it is. And I have to admit, I don't know enough about Heinlein's career trajectory to know if that's a thing when he sort of said, you know what, I'm going to stop writing adult novels and write adult novels. But, Stranger in a Strange Land is sort of focusing on issues of free love and stuff. And you can't put that in Starship Troopers, not if you're marketing it for kids in 1959.
Well, you certainly can't put it in the movie, but there is a sense of people don't have committed relationships when they're teenagers. Carmen's character, she's Johnny's I dated her, but she's not my girl. She's not anybody's girl. She'd come by and use my pool every once in a while with my mom's permission, and sometimes she'd bring a boy, and it was never the same boy twice. But she's not slut-shamed in any way about this. It's just who she is. And when she signs up to become a pilot, she's just yeah, I want to go for a pilot. And Johnny Rico's thinking she's great at math. She's great at programming. I think she's going to be a wonderful pilot, but oh my gosh, if she doesn't make pilot, she's going to, be able to go into research and development easy because she's so brilliant, right? He has vast amounts of respect for her and thinks she's going to have a great career. But it's not in any way and I worship her and I love her so much. And I don't want her to be had by any other man. It's nothing like that.
Yeah.
It's just really interesting because it's very clear that he's not trying to put those two in a permanent relationship with each other.
Yeah. I mean, that certainly also follows through in Stranger in a Strange Land, which is very much not interested in that kind of sexual fidelity. I mean, it's very not interested in that. Also, I should say that Robert Heinlein did not care for Project Moonbase and basically never wanted to talk about it again, as far as I know, after the movie was released.
Oh, well, that's a shame. It wasn't, I was going to say it wasn't terrible.
What are you talking about? It's terrible.
We have seen far worse. And we've seen less interesting.
You're setting the bar way too low. You're setting the bar way too low these days.
Perhaps
You've got to recalibrate. You got to go watch some King Kong versus Godzilla or something to raise your bar up a bit.
Hey, everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for the Shallow 13. 13 short facts with dramatic conclusions, all about today's experiment, Project Moonbase. Go, Chris, go.
I have nothing more to say about Radar Men from the Moon. But Project Moonbase, sure, we can talk more about that. Let's talk about its director, Richard Talmadge.
Richard Talmadge was born in Germany with a completely different name, which he changed when he arrived in Hollywood way back in 1910 and started working as a stuntman. Eventually, he had some success as an actor, but that all kind of fell apart with the introduction of the talkies. See, because Richard Talmadge was born in Germany and spoke with a noticeable German accent.
Still, Talmadge was also working behind the scenes as a stunt coordinator and as a director. His efforts as a lead director were, well, about as well received as Project Moonbase, but he was an assistant director or second unit director on several more notable features, including The Greatest Story Ever Told, starring, you guessed it, Donald Pleasance as Satan.
Tom recognizes the general from the start of the film.
Look, it's Dr. Bellows.
Hayden Rourke played Colonel Dr. Alfred Bellows in the TV show I Dream of Jeannie. Oh, hey, another story about astronauts and feminism.
Rourke was one of 4 cast members in Project Moonbase who had an appearance on Bonanza, along with Donna Martell, who plays Colonel Bright Eyes, Barbara Morrison, who plays reporter Polly Prattles, and Robert Carnes, who plays Sam, a guy who also appears in this film. Sadly, none of the actors made an appearance on Murder, She Wrote.
On to the riffing. Tom sees the credits to Radar Men from the Moon and quips,
George Wallace in his pre-gubernatorial days.
George Wallace was an on-again, off-again governor of Alabama during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and spent most of the 60s loudly and staunchly in support of segregation. What a complete face!
He even ran for president as a third-party candidate in 1968 and won 5 southern states. That wasn't enough to stop Nixon from winning enough of the conservative vote to get comfortably elected, but Wallace's success in exploiting voters' fear of people different from them would be noticed by future politicians.
Also, when Wallace had to leave office in 1967 due to term limits, his wife, Lurleen Wallace, was elected as the next governor. Girl power? Well, sadly, Lurleen Wallace, who had campaigned as Mrs. George Wallace at her husband's request, passed away from cancer a year after becoming governor.
She had been diagnosed with cancer way back in 1961, but the doctor gave the terrible news to George, and he decided not to tell her. She didn't find out until another doctor's appointment 4 years later. She was upset to learn that even though George wouldn't tell her about her illness, he did tell his staff. What a complete face.
Anyway, this George Wallace is not that George Wallace. This George Wallace was mostly known for starring as Commando Cody in the Radar Men from the Moon serial, but he also made appearances in Bonanza and, much later, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Star Trek The Next Generation, and Minority Report.
While a spaceship is flying to the moon, Crow says,
Hey, take a left at L2. You can't miss it. Dave's van is parked out front.
L2 refers to one of the Lagrange points. These are spots in space where the gravitational pull of 2 massive bodies, such as the Earth and the Moon, form a kind of equilibrium. They're a real convenient place to plop a satellite. The James Webb Space Telescope is at the L2 of the Sun and the Earth.
Lagrange points were discovered by Italian mathematician Joseph Louis Lagrange in the 1700s, except L2 was actually discovered 10 years earlier by Swiss mathematician Leonhard Euler, because there is no part of math that Euler did not get to first, the little show-off.
And if you're going from the Earth to the Moon and you reach L2, you've already shot past the Moon. But I guess if you keep turning left, eventually you'll have turned all the way around and will once again be facing the Moon. Anyway, bon voyage!
And that's time!
Fun little fact about Project Moonbase.
Ooh, yes?
Is that the sets were used in another movie that was released the day before Project Moonbase came out. a movie which Joel riffs about at one point.
And it's filled with cat food. This rocket was supposed to go to the cat women of the moon.
Oh, I remember him saying this. It was so weird because I was like, why is he talking about cat women of the moon? Why would somebody be sending something to the cat women of the moon when there's nobody else on the moon except for these two people and the dead guy?
Well, it turns out there's some cat women there, but I guess they didn't meet them. Cat Women of the Moon. I've been meaning to watch this movie for a while.
So you knew about it beforehand.
I did know about this movie beforehand.
What was it about this movie that you were like, oh, that's a movie I must see one day?
Well, it's got cat women, do you see? So
It's true.
It just sounds adorable. Cat women from the moon. Meow, 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 meow.
It's true. And yeah, I can totally see the appeal. I appreciate the cat women and the bat women. They're all great.
Yeah, unfortunately, the cat women are not cat women except that they wear really cool, like, cat suits.
Oh, and they have cat eye makeup on.
That's also true. That's also true.
I mean, very, very big cat eye makeup.
They look great. The cat
They
women of the
do.
moon, they're so much fun to just look at. It's such a, of all the like stories of astronauts going to a place and then meeting a place that's full of women, and we've encountered a few of them on this show, Cat Women of the Moon is the most delightful in terms of the women they meet because they're all just like jazz. They're all doing choreography
From White Christmas.
From
Totally.
White Christmas,
The
yes.
entire time I was watching this, I was like, oh my gosh, that's Danny Kaye's choreography. I see it now.
And there is a sequence where they start dancing. And it's the one time I've ever encountered one of these 50s movies where the women start dancing. And I'm like, yes.
God, that's just not how I thought about it when I saw it at all. Oh, but their dance is lovely. It's mainly hands. And posing. It sort of reminded me in The Music Man, they have the Grecian urn exercise routine that the ladies do, where they have to walk a little bit and then they have to pose like, Athenian women in their toga roby things.
Yeah, they're throwing up shapes. It's great.
Yes, they're throwing up shapes.
Which is hardly the worst thing a cat woman could throw up.
I mean, honestly, if we're leaning on the cat part or the woman part, really, I agree.
I wasn't making a joke about women throwing things.
Wow. I'm just thinking of throw up in general. Is there any part of it that's good? No.
I've got a very pukey cat. It happens.
It's true.
So yeah, the other day, she was making so much noise. I thought the neighbors were like building furniture.
No way.
We're getting off track.
We are a little bit. It's true. Cat women of the moon.
In addition to the cat women of the moon, which, typical 50s story, astronauts go into space, they find cat women from the moon, they must escape and return to Earth. Fine. But in addition to the Catwoman, the other great joy of this movie is the star of the movie, Marie Windsor.
She's amazing.
Everybody, you remember Marie Windsor from Swamp Diamonds?
Yeah, and if you don't, shame on you. Shame on you. She's amazing. She's so good in this movie as the Earth woman who's been receiving telepathic communications from the Catwomen on the moon unknowingly in a dream trance. It's great.
Yes. So the Catwomen of the Moon have the power to do this, I guess, to Earth women. And they wanted to get a ship to come up to the moon so that they could get on it and escape. And sure, that makes sense.
Yes, because they're running out of atmosphere. They're not going to stay alive for much longer.
Exactly. But they realized that in 1950s America, or whenever this is supposed to be set, that you can't just populate an entire rocket with women. That's not going to work. They'll never get into the air.
Even though they weigh less than the men, and you know that it's going to cost less to send them into space. I mean, they make such a big deal of that on Project Moonbase, and yet in Catwomen of the Moon, somehow it just never comes up.
It's true. But the idea that NASA or whoever would allow an all-women crew to go up is like, no, they're never going to let that happen. But we can get one on. We can find one clever woman to be the navigator.
And we can help her be the most clever woman ever by telling her things and teaching her things that the regular people on Earth, men and women included, would not know about navigation.
And if we play our cards right, we can even pick Marie Windsor.
And the Catwomen did. Clearly, they played a perfect hand because they got her.
This movie was better than Project Moonbase, I thought.
Absolutely. 100% better.
But maybe not as gloriously Catwoman-ish as I kind of dreamed it would be.
Yeah. Well, how much more cat-like do you want them to be?
100,000%.
Do you want them to have tails and fur?
I want them to have tails. I want them to lick their hands and then rub behind their ears. I want them to cover their litter. I don't care. I want them to be as cat-like as possible. I want Taylor Swift dressed up as a cat like in Cats 2019, singing her little heart out while luring these men to the moon. But there were some really delightful moments in this film as well. So.
I agree. I enjoyed it so much more than Project Moonbase, but I have to say, Chris, I watched it for realsies, but then I also watched the Riff Tracks version of this one.
Uh-huh.
And the Riff Tracks version has Bridget Nelson and Mary Jo Pehl doing the riffing. And oh my God, it was like sitting down with my two best friends and watching this movie, and it was catty and it was awesome. I mean, the things that they said would never have been said in an MST3K riff about this because it was just the two of them watching this sassy girl movie. Oh, at one point in time, they're like traveling towards the moon and there's a noise in the background like and Bridget's like, oh my God, my mom is already on the moon vacuuming. I'm just like, oh my God, I love that.
That's all right. I've been meaning to watch a Mary Jo and Bridget riff forever. Maybe this will be the one I finally do because I could probably enjoy watching this again. And if it's that good of a riff, I'll give it a try.
It's such a good riff. I was literally laughing out loud, not just typing LOL on my phone the entire time.
There are also some really fun moments just in the movie itself where, like, they land on the dark side of the moon because that's where the special cave that Marie's been told to lead them to is. That fine. But, like, apparently only like a hop, skip, and a jump away from the bright side of the moon. And, okay, first off, they seem to think that the dark side of the moon is permanently dark. And not dark because it's the part we can't see and therefore don't have any information about.
It's totally true. That was lots of fun.
And secondly, they determine that it's very dangerous to be on the bright side of the moon because they drop a cigarette which Marie Windsor keeps in her belt of her spacesuit.
Yeah, because she just doesn't feel comfortable without having cigarettes on her. What a statement about society that is.
Loved that. The other scientist, one of the boy scientist guys, takes out one of the cigarettes, tosses it onto the bright side, and it goes up in flames.
Oh my God. So this, when I was watching it, I was just like, you cannot even, there's no oxygen on the moon. You just had something flame and burn. There's no oxygen. You can't have that happen. That doesn't make any sense. And then, like a beat later in the movie, they get into a cave where there's moisture and they're like, moisture on the moon? Maybe there's atmosphere in here. And one of the other guys lights one of Marie Windsor's match and is just like, it's burning. That means there's oxygen. And it's just like, you dumb shits. You just lit something on fire outside of this cave. You had atmosphere before, you dingbats. I can't believe it.
But there is no atmosphere outside, allegedly, but they still saw fire. So, like, oh my, the exact same logic that they used to test yeah, it was an amazing choice. Absolutely amazing choice.
It was great.
Well, Charlotte, we've spoken for almost an hour, but not quite an hour, which means we have time for just one more final factoid if you've got something fun for us.
I have a final factoid, but I think it'll probably be a little brief.
It's supposed to be.
Oh, well, that's perfect.
It's just a factoid, not a full fact.
There is a point in time where Joel makes a super cool riff about Joe Montana.
Okay.
It's a scene where one of the characters is throwing something to another character and it doesn't quite get where it's supposed to go. And Joel makes a comment like, "Oh, he's open, he's available. Montana makes the pass. Oh, it comes up short. It must be his rotator cuff."
Montana looks left.
Drop your gun.
He's open.
Where's Graven?
Fires away, and it's incomplete. Oh, that could have been his rotator cuff.
Joe Montana played football.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you at least have that context, Chris. I'm so proud of you for remembering that.
And he didn't found a state. That's what I know about Joe Montana.
That is true. Those are two good things to know. So he's not like Indiana Jones, who totally founded a state. No, Joe Montana is like an icon of my childhood
Okay.
because he was the quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers inside of the 80s.
Oh, yes, that makes sense now.
Totally. And for the entire 80s, like he was brought on as a member of the 49ers in 1979, and he played there all the way until 1992. He won multiple Super Bowls. He was MVP of the Super Bowl multiple times. There are arguments that he's the greatest quarterback ever. He was called Joe Cool, huh? You know Joe Cool.
Okay, he was Joe Cool.
He was Joe Cool. They called him the comeback kid.
He was friends with Spuds McKenzie.
He was who isn't friends with Spuds McKenzie in the 80s? Like, Spuds McKenzie was awesome.
Uh-huh.
Joe Montana, number 16, number retired for the San Francisco 49ers. Anyway, just, all around good guy. Really enjoyed Joe Montana as our quarterback for the Niners.
Sorry, is the final factoid Joe Montana was cool?
I mean, it's in his name. No, I was looking up to see if he really did have a rotator cuff injury because it's like
Surely he did.
Surely he did, right? He was taken out of the season a couple of times with injuries. I mean, obviously, I think every football player is, and he is a quarterback, so like his injuries are going to be shoulder arm type things. And he did have a big shoulder thing, like in the 70s, and when he was having a rough time and his last couple of years with the Niners, he did have an elbow injury, but nowhere could I find it actually referred to as a rotator cuff injury. So I'm wondering why a rotator cuff injury, Joel? Huh?
Did you get to the bottom of this?
He doesn't have a rotator cuff injury, according to any information I could find on Wikipedia. So I just need to put a call out to listeners. Why the rotator cuff injury on Joe Montana? Why are we besmirching his name like this?
It's not besmirching anyone's name to say that they got an injury.
It is if you're calling it the wrong thing, Chris. I mean,
it's
this
okay.
man this man spent like 13 years as the lead almost his entire career, over a decade with the Niners as their number
Listeners,
one.
You need to know that it's nearly midnight where I am.
I know.
Okay, come on, John Boys, tell me more about football.
Just telling you, Joe Montana, he's my quarterback. If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you've ever gone pss, pss, pss at the moon, or if you'd like to ask us anything, get in touch with us. Our email is info@itsjustashow.com, and we're on Blue Sky. Look us up. We'd love to hear from you. This show is made possible by listeners like you, and like our randomly selected supporter, Deborah. Thank you, Deborah. For about $1 an episode, you can be like Deborah and help us research and record this show. You can join us in a friendly Discord, and you can listen to all our super fan bonus bits. Find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/168. Chris, I know that you've told us that there's one more Commando Cody short to go, but it's not next, is it?
Not next, no. Instead, we're going to be looking at Season 4, Episode 11, The Magic Sword.
You know, I'm really tempted to make a 411 joke right now.
Go for it. Let's hear it.
I don't have a good one. I'm just tempted to do so. This is my problem. You know, like the joke I always make is that I'm down with the 411. I know what the kids are into, but the fact is I just don't. And I have no idea what the 411 is. That's why I had to ask you. The Magic Sword, huh?
Yeah, starring Basil Rathbone and Estelle Winwood.
That means we get to talk about Sherlock Holmes.
We certainly could. It would not be that strange for us to do.
Oh, I hope we talk about Sherlock Holmes.
Well, we'll talk about that more next time, perhaps. But until then...
Sorry to have gone female on you, Major. I didn't mean to take advantage.
And that's the t-shirt her mom got married in. Take it away, Theme Squad. Meow, 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 meow.